So the last 2 or 3 sessions we discussed the question of the tradition of Moroccan rabbis or North Africa in general versus the chief rabbinate in Israel at the time of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and his son Rabbi Yosef. That and I said that the problem with rejecting the tradition was not just specific laws, but the general trajectory, the general direction in which the Moroccan rabbis were leading, which was more accommodating and more inclusive, etc. I also mentioned this letter that was published in Israel about a year and a half ago, where many rabbis from North African origin, wrote a letter that they abide by all the rulings of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and his son, Rabbi Yitzhak and Rabbi David Yosef. And it turned out that some of the rabbis who signed the letters, the leading authorities, really like, let's say, the top tier of the rabbinical leadership in Israel, were misled regarding the content of the letter, meaning they were shown one, and then their signatures were published on a little different version. And then the second tier, the not senior rabbis, represented an opinion. They said that they represent the whole community, but it wasn't so. So the one who went really to clarify this issue was Rabbi Zechariah Zermati, who had the Machon called Torat Emet, who is very keen on keeping the legacy and tradition of the North Africa and especially Moroccan rabbis. He also wrote a book called Hod Yosef Hai, where he sums up all the halachot by Rabbi Yosef Meshash, because Rabbi Meshash is one of the rabbis who were particularly targeted by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, trying to push him aside, and he presents all of his halachot, including halacha that Rabbi Yosef Meshash writes that the Sephardim never had the tradition to eat basar halak or basar bet Yosef, this whole thing. So even Rabbi Zermati makes a comment. He says today we have it available, so it's not a problem. But he admits that was not our tradition. That any basar, any meat that came with a kosher stamp was okay for the Sephardim. It was. It is something that is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, but never was practiced in the 500 years between the Shulchan Aruch and modern times. So what Rabbi Zermati says is this. This letter that was published is actually Moda'at Evel. It's the posters that you see in Israel mourning the death of someone. He says it's the death of La'achiz al Mota Halila V'Has Shel Torat Rabbanei HaMa'arav Rabbanei Emet. He says this is like a mourning statement saying that the Torah of North Africa has died. That's how serious for him is that issue. It's called Rabbanei Emet. Emet is truth, but also he used this as an acronym for Algiers, Morocco, Tunisia. So this is Emet.
Interesting.
So he says that those rabbis who were quoted in the letter as supporting the unified halacha for all and abandoning the North African customs, he says, דבריהם האמיתיים של אותם גאונים כבר כתובים עלי ספר בחיבוריהם הנפלאים, והם אשר פסקו עוד בימי הראשון לציון הרב עובדיה יוסף, שאין לוותר על מנהגי המערב כלל וכלל, וקל וחומר שלא יחזרו מדבריהם בפני בנו. והדברים פשוטים. He says all these rabbis who were quoted in the letter as ones who accepted the rulings of Ovadia Yosef wrote clearly in their books that this is not so, and if they did not accept the ruling of the father, even more so that of the son. Meaning that this whole thing was really part of a political agenda to establish the chief rabbi of Israel today as the ultimate authority. So he quotes Rabbi David Shlush, which we're going to go into in depth later. Rabbi David Shlush wrote in his book Hemda Genuzam. He says this: אם הייתה מחלוקת קדומה בין החכמים, זה אוסר וזה מתיר, ונהגו להקל מפני שהיה רבם או שחכמי המקום נוטים אחר דעתו בעניין זה. What if there is an ancient debate between the scholars, meaning there's something that different rabbis ruled on differently, and that goes back hundreds of years. In this case, before the time of the Shulchan Aruch, or after the Shulchan Aruch, but before the time of the modern rabbis like Haim Ovadia Yosef. And some rabbis ruled that you could be lenient based on one opinion because they followed the local rabbi, or that was the local practice. מניחים אותם על מנהגם, אף שהרבה מקומות נהגו לאסור. You let them continue with their practice, even though there are many other places where this is forbidden, because they have an established tradition. And one example that it brings is אין ראיה לאסור לעמוד בעשרת הדיברות ואין חשש לתרעומת המינים. There was a practice according to which people used to stand up when you read in the Torah the 10 Commandments. So the Talmud says, don't do that. And Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also was against it. Why? Because people would have said, when they see that you stand at the 10 Commandments, they would have said, oh, that's the only important part of the Torah. The rest of the Torah is not important. Why don't you stand throughout the whole reading? And the Ashkenazi custom indeed is to stand throughout the whole reading. So most people said you either sit or you stand. But if you stand up in the middle for one portion, it means that this is more important than the rest. But that was, as Maimonides says, because people will turn against the Torah, there will be heretics. But Rabbi David Shlush said that today we are not concerned about that. There are no heretics among us. And this minhag of standing up is a nice minhag. It's a nice custom. Rabbi-ovadia Yosef tried to abolish that. And Rabbi David Shlush says, we adhere to our minhag. Also, another very important ruling, מקום אחר לימד זכות על היתר קביעת העירוב על ידי צורת הפתח לחי וקורה בערי ארץ ישראל. There was a question of how to do an עירוב in a big city. So the ancient halakha, going all the way from the time of the Talmud, says that you need two conditions to turn a certain place into a what is called Reshut HaRabim, public domain, where you cannot carry on Shabbat. The conditions are it needs to have wide streets, about 16 feet wide, and traffic of 600,000 people daily that go through the streets. So Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch said that one condition is enough. Meaning if you have wide streets, that's enough to turn the place into a public domain, and therefore the regular Eruv cannot help. I mean, what is called Tzurat HaPetach, just making a pole and a string. They said you need a real wall to fence it off. But we know that the Sephardic custom, even after the Shulchan Aruch was more strict regarding that, the Sephardic custom was to just put a string around the town in a certain way, and that would have been enough to make it an Eruv and to carry within the city. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was against it. And as a result, there are many people today in Sephardic communities in Israel and also in Brooklyn that say, we don't carry even though there is an Eruv. And it creates a lot of problems. Because, children, especially when you have children, bachelors who are in the yeshiva, okay, don't carry, so before you go out of the house, you make sure you have no tissues, no keys, anything, everybody turn their locks into codes, that you could, you don't need to carry a key. But what happens when you have children? You have a stroller, you have, so you wait until the kid is 3 years old and he can walk on his own. But then, in the middle of the road, the kid sits down and says, I can't walk anymore. And he's crying and you can't pick him up. Balagan. So, Rabbi David Shlush again, on this issue, he says, this is our custom and this is what we do. Same follows for Hazarat Hashatz. That the Moroccan minhag was not to do Hazarat Hashatz, the repetition of Amidah, Yemenet Tfilot. And they were adamant in keeping this minhag. Same, another halakha, and also Hamid Agnuza, that the women are allowed to say brachot for mitzvot which depend on time, such as lulav, shofar, etc. So he says you have to be careful before you go on and publish a letter like that saying everybody agrees on that. You really have to go and do research on the halakha on a one-on-one basis to see what are the opinions of all the rabbis. Now, another very interesting argument that was presented by the rabbis who signed the letter is they say we have to respect the chief rabbinate of Israel. This is an interesting argument because we have to speak a little bit about the chief rabbinate of Israel. The chief rabbinate was established by the state of Israel. There was a chief rabbi before. Before the state of Israel, there was, in the 1920s or 30s, Rabbi Avraham Yitzhak Cohen Cook was declared the first chief rabbi of Israel. It was the chief, the Va'ada Moshavot. There was like the leadership, the secular leadership declared him to be the rabbi.
It's not just rabbis that vote for him, it's the whole population.
The whole population, right. The accurate title, though, is the chief Ashkenazi rabbi, because the chief Sephardic rabbi was, at the same time with Rabbi Cook, was Rav Ben Zion Meir Hai Uziel, and his title was Rishon LeZion. And that title, the Rishon LeZion, was ancient. It was at least 300 years. It was decided among the rabbis of Yerushalayim. At a certain point, they said, we want one of us to be the leader. So they wanted to call him a chief rabbi, but he refused. I think it was Rabbi Navon at the time, the first one. And he said, I cannot be called the chief rabbi because everybody is knowledgeable. Rather, I'll use the term Rishon LeZion, which means the first of Zion. So what he meant was, in a humble way, I'm just the first out of many. I happen to be the first in line, but I'm not. It's not a vertical hierarchy where I'm on top and you're below me, but we are just one line. Someone has to be the first in line. That was the Rishon LeZion. But after the establishment of the state of Israel, many factions within the Orthodox community who were anti-Zionist, who did not accept the establishment of the state of Israel, rejected the establishment of the chief rabbinate. They said they, for us, are not an authority. And I remember when I was a teenager and Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu became the chief rabbi, and since it's very close with my family, he used to come and give classes in my grandfather's synagogue, Minhat Yehuda. We went to I was in high school, so I went to put posters around town. And in one Haredi neighborhood, a couple of kids come over and they look at this, and it says, it's the Rishon LeZion, the chief rabbi, Haim Ovadia, and they look at it and say, oh, who's talking? Mordechai Eliyahu? Like they talk about as if he were their friend. It was amazing to see that you could have inculcated in children such disregard for scholars. People talk like that only if at home they don't have the respect instilled in them for the Torah. Forget it in the politics, but speak respectfully. That wasn't that. So Rabbi Zermati says, "Lema'an Hashem, lo lanu ללמדנו לכבד את מוסד הרבנות הראשית מאז וסדרה." Says those rabbis who signed the letters supporting the authority of Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef against the rabbis of North Africa said, we have to respect him because he's the chief rabbi. Rabbi Zermati says, oh, Boker Tov, now you wake up. When it suits you, you want to follow the ruling. He says, with all other things, you went against the chief rabbinate for years, but only when now it's it suits you, that's what you want to do. He says, what about the takana קדומה של הרבנות הראשית לבאר ברכת שהחיינו ביום העצמאות? He says, the chief rabbinate and Rabbi Yosef Meshash in Otzar HaMichtav both ruled very clearly that we are Yehudim Haredim ועושים כדעת הרבנות הראשית ביום העצמאות יום טוב בהלל גמור ובמשתה. The chief rabbinate ruled that Yom HaAtzmaut should be celebrated as a holiday, to say Hallel with bracha, to have a festive meal. He says all these rabbis who signed the letters and said we have to respect the chief rabbinate, do they do that? They don't do that. He says, so this is another argument that he says, just in general, we know that the Moroccan rabbis did not accept these rulings, and we know that those who signed the letters did not respect the chief rabbinate until that moment. And now he quotes several statements of the ancient generations of Moroccan rabbis. And because we have here a descendant of Rabbi Ben Denan, I'm going to quote this last thing from Rabbi Ben Denan. He says, "Be'ir va'em be'Yisrael Fez, misham tetzeh Torat gedolei shoshelet Ibn Denan." He says in Fez, which was a leading city in his Ir va'em, means a city and a mother, meaning that is the in the hierarchy of Torah, it ranks at a very high place. From there comes the Torah of the great rabbis from the dynasty of Ibn Denan. It says a Sefer.
About 1,000 years.
Yes, more than 1,000 years.
I wrote a book, 1,000 years of Ibn Denan.
Right? Yeah, very, very long ancient tradition. So a Sefer by Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Denan called Bikesh Shlomo.
My grandfather used to pray.
Okay. In the synagogue. So his book is called Bikesh Shlomo. He was a descendant of Maimonides. And he says this. In Fez, there was a custom pertaining to the Dayanim. It was only regarding the judges, the Dayanim, that if there's one Dayan only, one rabbi, he could sit in court and hear argument and issue a verdict. And according to Shulchan Aruch, you need to have 3 rabbis in a rabbinical court. But the ancient custom in Fez was one rabbi is enough. So Rabbi Ben Denan writes the following: וזה הפך דברי מרן ז"ל שקיבלנו הוראותיו ושכנו המנהג. He writes back to someone, he says, you wrote that our custom is against the words of Shulchan Aruch, and you wrote that we have accepted the words of the Shulchan Aruch to the letter. He says, בדרך קצרה אומר, כי קושטה הוא שאנו קיבלנו הוראות מרן זיעה. He says, yeah, in general, we follow the Shulchan Aruch, but not on every word. כי כן קיימו וקיבלו אבותינו ורבותינו. Yeah, this was, and it's natural that they would do that. Remember when I spoke about the Shulchan Aruch, because Shulchan Aruch left this room for flexibility. So if you analyze most of the Moroccan minhagim, you will find that most of them are rooted in Shulchan Aruch in one way or another. It says, but la kelalahu lechol hadinim ve'alachot. It's not a sweeping rule of all practices. כי כמה הלכות אשר לא הלכו בהם אחר מרן ונשארו בהם מנהגן מקדם. Says there are several laws in which we did not follow the Shulchan Aruch, and we stuck with our ancient minhag, and this to sit in court with only one rabbi is one of them, and is very adamant to clarify that this is ve'of lo tzavach tzipor lo tziftzef. This is the phrase that he uses here is taken from the words of the Midrash about Matan Torah on Har Sinai. They say when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Am Yisrael on Har Sinai, God didn't want anyone to think that he heard another voice. So God hushed the whole world. Like you mute the phone when people to. So God muted the whole world to the point that the birds didn't fly or chirp. There were nobody was, so to say tzipor or tziftzef, it's like not a sound. So Rabbi Ibn Denan seals his argument. He says, yes, I know what the Shulchan Aruch wrote, but this is what we've done. This is our ancient tradition, and this is what we follow, and not a bird will chirp.